This is Cast of Wonders, the fiction audio magazine for young adults featuring stories of the fantastic. Welcome. Today we present Campfire Story by Mark Brandon Allen. Mark began writing science fiction and fantasy purely for the amusement of his friends, children and grandchildren. He lives in Valparaiso, Indiana, where a vicious 3-pound Yorkshire Terrier holds both he and his wife hostage. His work has been published in the pages of Demon Minds Anthology, Bullspec, The Last Man Anthology, Sounds of the Night, Indiana Science Fiction Anthology 2011, and Paluto, amongst others. You can find out more about Mark at markbrandonallen.com. Mark also has a book out on the Lulu Books website, If's Imagine Fantasy Science Fiction, issue number 1. Within the context of fantasy and science fiction pulps, If's Imagine Fantasy Science Fiction has much to recommend itself to the speculative fiction reader. The 19 Ifs within the book's lineup make a meaty and satisfying read. For more about the book, go to lulu.com and search for If's Imagine or Mark Brandon Allen, available as an EPUB file or a paperback. Also available as a Kindle edition from Smashwords. A purchase would help this writer stave off abject poverty. Check the show notes for details. And now, we've a tale to tell. Campfire Story by Mark Brandon Allen. The risen moon floated in the night sky above Camp Divide as the campmaster, Hollister, led the junior space cadets in the camp welcome song. Hollister was one of the first settlers on Phoebes in the Rebelon system after terraforming began. Now a jowly grey-haired grandfather figure with indelible lines at the corners of his mouth and wrinkles above his bushy white eyebrows, he was little more than a babysitter. A gifted storyteller, Hollister's one remaining joy was the telling of scary old stories on the first night of space camp. It always gave him a perverse thrill to arouse fear in the minds of the young campers placed in his care for their 2 weeks at Camp Divide. When the welcome song sung by the boys and girls ended, Hollister peered out through ancient steel-rimmed glasses at the 28 space cadets seated around the campfire. Almost as if it were planned, a breeze moved through the giant terraformed trees, rustling their leaves. Hollister knew that many of the children had never seen a tree before, and none of them had ever heard tall timber creak and groan in the wind this way. To them, all these sounds were new and scary. Children this age, away from their parents and their home planet, deep within the forest shadows of a terraformed timber planet for the first time, are so easily frightened, he thought to himself, especially if a story has anything to do with snakes, demons, tree sprites, or every spaceman's nightmare, freezing. Hollister grinned. The background noises would add depth to the tale he had planned. He rubbed his hands together in anticipation. Only his assistant knew about the practical joke that he had planned for that evening to frighten this group of junior space cadets. Outlined by the flames from the blazing campfire, Hollister's shadow danced across the trunks of the trees beyond the campfire's circle as he began his story. "There is an ancient goddess," he said, "who is trying to reclaim her simple grassland world from us. An evil nymph from the planet Gorgon who flits from the woodlands of one terraformed planet to another within the Rebelon system. She is searching for the descendants of the spacemen who terraformed her home of flowers into stands of tall timber. A terraformed timber planet like Phoebes." Hollister raised his arms to point at the trees and then paused to watch his audience of 6- and 7-year-olds to be sure he had them drawn into his story. The golden-skinned goddess, he continued, is a fearsome dryad, whose hair is a tangle of forest leaves and slithering poisonous green snakes. The campfire seemed to flame in rhythm with Hollister's tall tale. It flickered and hissed in the oxygen-rich atmosphere of Thebes, the dark-side night punctuating his sentences. Watching the discomfort grow on the faces of the young campers, Hollister continued to describe the fearsome horror that the alien demon of this story could bring with her compelling smile. Those who gaze upon this creature's smile are instantly turned to space ice, Hollister said, a fate worse than death for any spaceman. The wind through the trees continued to moan soulfully, adding eerie sound effects to the vivid images that Hollister depicted. As the campfire began to die down to glowing embers, the smoke coiled into the air like a giant twisting snake pushing up through the canopy of the surrounding trees. Wide-eyed, the group of junior space cadets bunched closer and closer together. "Beware the Gorgon's smile!" Hollister placed a finger before his lips and whispered, "Beware." On cue, when Hollister ended the story, his assistant jumped out from behind one of the trees, ringing the huddle of children. Running toward the smouldering campfire, he shouted, "Run! Run! The Gorgon goddess is in the woods! The Gorgon goddess is coming! The Gorgon is here! The Gorgon is here!" Hollister could not restrain himself. He doubled over in laughter as the 28 junior space cadets scattered in every direction. In terror, they fell over one another in their attempt to distance themselves from the fading light of the campfire. Hollister's staff rounded up the frightened campers. After calming the children down, reassuring them that his story was just an old space legend, Hollister dismissed the boys and girls for the night. "It's so easy to scare young folks these days," Hollister chuckled to himself. He was sure that very few of the junior space cadets would sleep well. They'd be hiding under the blankets of their cabin cots, listening to the sound of the trees in the night, afraid to sleep. Their lanterns would remain lit all night long. When the campfire was finally extinguished, Hollister retreated through the tangle of forest trees to his own cabin. Still chuckling to himself, the campmaster lit his lantern and turned towards his own cot. The Gorgon was sitting there, gently stroking at her hissing tangle of hair. She brushed a viper away from her forehead and smiled at Hollister. He froze. And so ends Campfire Story. Come tell us what you thought of the story in the forums at castofwonders.org/forums. We'd love to hear from you. Cast of Wonders is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. Share it but don't change or sell it. Theme is Appeal to Heavens by Alexei Nov from musicalley.com.